Good evening and welcome to Novara Live. My name's Stephen Methven, and tonight I'm joined by Dr. Mike Bankole. Mike, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad, Stephen. Great to see you on the show with you again. Looking forward to it. Got some interesting stories to cover, so it should be a good one.
Tonight, we take a look at what we know of Donald Trump's likely cabinet. Israel misses a US-imposed deadline to get more aid into Gaza, and Gary Lineker appears to have been pushed out of match of the day. The global climate conference COP29 has opened in Baku, Azerbaijan. Missing from the meeting, though, are the leaders of the world's 13 largest producers of carbon dioxide emissions. Among them, none of the leaders of the US, China, India, or Indonesia have bothered to attend. But that was good news for British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, making him an unlikely star of the show. And he took the opportunity to lay out a new 2035 climate goal for the UK.
At this COP, I was pleased to announce that we're building on our reputation as a climate leader, with the UK's 2035 NDC target to reduce all greenhouse gas emissions by at least 81% on 1990 levels. Our goal of 1.5 degrees is aligned with our goals for growth. But a global problem also requires global partnership, responsible international cooperation, which is why we took the opportunity at this COP to again urge all parties to come forward with ambitious targets of their own, as we all agreed at the last COP.
That new 2035 pledge to cut carbon emissions by 81% on 1990 levels is what's called in UN speak a Nationally Determined Contributions Plan, or NDC. And Starmer's announcement today makes the UK amongst the first countries in the world to announce one. An NDC announcement from COP28 host United Arab Emirates last year was labelled greenwashing by climate groups, while next year's host Brazil had their NDC panned as insufficient and misaligned. But Starmer's announcement has had a much warmer welcome. Head of campaigns for Friends of the Earth, Rosie Downs, said this. With the warning signals flashing red, a planet battered by increasingly severe floods, storms and heat waves, and the election of climate denier President Trump, the need for climate leadership by the UK has never been more urgent. Starmer's 2035 carbon reduction pledge is a step in the right direction, but must be seen as a floor to the level of ambition and not a ceiling. Deeper, faster cuts are needed to help avert the climate collision course we are on. So, how difficult will it be for the UK to reach that 81% target? Now, the UK has already cut around 50% of its carbon emissions compared to 1990, meaning we're about halfway there. But the devil is in the detail. In 1990, domestic electricity production was responsible for about a quarter of our emissions. Today, it's almost the smallest sector, and that's significantly due to the phase-out of coal power plants and a turn to renewables. In 2022, electricity production was only responsible for around 14% of our carbon emissions. Meanwhile, areas like transport, agriculture, and heating for buildings have seen much smaller reductions. So, if you're looking for places to cut emissions, those are the obvious areas where the deepest cuts can still be made: heating, food, and transport. Here's Starmer again.
You've set out this ambitious target on emissions, but you've not really set out how you're going to get there. What is this going to mean? Is it fewer car journeys, fewer gas boilers, more expensive food? What is the potential cost to people?
Well, we've set out the target, which is an important, ambitious target. What we're not going to do is start telling people how to live their lives. We're not going to start dictating to people what they do. But we are going to be clear that that involves hitting the Clean Power 2030 mission that we've set out, one of the 5 big projects of government. That is vital. So we will hit that. It is an ambitious target. It's a realisable target, but it's not going to be one in which we tell people how to live their lives.
Now, that swerve there to the government's 2030 Clean Power Plan is kind of irrelevant because, as I said earlier, making all any energy production carbon-free by 2030 is only really going to take us a small way to the new 81% reduction goal by 2035. Now, earlier today, I spoke to Rebecca Newsom, Senior Political Advisor at Greenpeace UK, who's currently in Baku. And I began by asking her what she made of the new target.
I think in the context of the shadow cast over these climate talks following the recent election from Trump, it's really good to see that Starmer has come forward and actually come to the COP itself and brought forward this new target, which genuinely is relatively ambitious compared to many other countries. And it does help to inject some momentum into these talks and help move the whole conversation on. And in the context of more and more extreme weather events devastating communities around the world, from Spain to the Philippines to the US, it couldn't be more urgent to really inject some momentum into these talks and try to push for the boldest possible action. In particular, we need a strong outcome on new international climate finance for developing countries, and we need strong leadership on actually delivering a fossil fuel phase out. And certainly, I think some of the announcements from Starmer today will send some positive signals, even though it's certainly not in line with the most ambitious version that we need to see from the UK to really represent its historic responsibility.
I want to ask you about the political domestic impact of that pledge. So Starmer was asked whether people could expect to see higher food costs, be able to drive their cars less, or removal of gas boilers from their houses. The transport, agriculture, and heating of buildings being the larger of the areas where we emit carbon. And he answered by saying that he wouldn't tell people how to live their lives. In other words, that it wouldn't have an impact on how people live their lives. What do you make of that answer?
I think there is actually a distinction between not telling people how to live their lives and there not being an impact from policies that are needed to tackle climate change. But I think, I think it's, to be honest, a relatively sensible and reasonable thing for the Prime Minister to say, not least when there are huge opportunities from taking climate action when it comes to public transport, for example. Actually, it's incredibly popular to have more public transport and to electrify public transport. People who benefit from public transport the most tend to be the people on the lowest incomes who can't afford to own a car in the first place. Similarly, a transition to more plant-based diets with the right support measures in place to make sure it's not too expensive for people can also be really healthy. Similarly, investment in insulating our homes is going to tackle both fuel poverty, reduce our bills, and mean that we're not exposed to volatile fossil fuel prices. So overall, actually, the climate transition has many opportunities, and I haven't even mentioned green jobs. And of course, the government needs to show leadership to make sure the right policies are in place to protect workers in the transition and allow workers to reskill and to ensure that, even the people on the lowest incomes actually are benefited and protected from that transition along the way. But overall, this is a transition that everyone stands to gain from with the right political leadership.
I want to go back to something you mentioned in your first answer, which is one of the goals of this COP is to establish a new goal for fundraising for a fund which will help poor economies do a green transition. And figures that I've heard are anywhere between 500 billion and 1 trillion per year, up to 5 trillion at its most ambitious. But now that we have a Trump presidency, a man who has shown little commitment to international projects and even less commitment to environmental concerns, how do you think that's going to affect the willingness of other leaders to commit to giving to such a fund?
I can't dispute the fact that, the election of Trump in general and the things that he said about climate change and the UN process does cast a shadow over things. And certainly it's very concerning. However, I think we have to remember that there are 90 world leaders who are here today. And also, actually, there's a growing debate when it comes to the international climate finance agenda around taxing polluting companies more. So, often developed countries talk about the fact that there is, supposedly no money to pay up and support developing countries who are exposed to climate impacts. But in fact, actually, if we were to tax the polluters more, particularly the fossil fuel industry, we could tap into new sources of revenue to deliver that obligation. And indeed, in these talks, throughout the year, there's been increasing momentum around this issue, irrespective of what's happening in the White House over in the US. So, we've got the Global Solidarity Levies Task Force, which is a new grouping set up by France, Barbados, and Kenya. The EU has been pushing this agenda within the negotiations, as have some other developing countries. So I think regardless of Trump, this conversation is going to continue to have traction and may well provide us with a way forward in the talks.
Azerbaijan's president, Ilham Aliyev, has said that he wants COP29 to be a COP of peace. Now, some have found that statement laughable. Just last year, around 120,000 ethnic Armenians fled Nagorno-Karabakh following a shelling campaign by Azerbaijan. Nagorno-Karabakh was, until last year, a breakaway region governed by ethnic Armenians. Around 80% of Armenian residents have now left the region. For many legal experts, the exodus that resulted from Azerbaijan shelling amounts to a war crime. But there wasn't much fuss from the international community, perhaps because Azerbaijan is a major exporter of oil and gas, much like COP's last host, the United Arab Emirates. That's an industry the country doesn't seem very interested in cutting back. In fact, it plans to increase production, having struck a deal with the United Arab Emirates. Perhaps they began those negotiations in the back rooms of last year's COP. Speaking at the opening of COP29, the country's president said this.
To accuse us that we have oil is the same like to accuse us that we have more than 250 sunny days a year in Baku. Countries should be judged by other criteria. For instance, level of unemployment. In Azerbaijan, it is 5.4%. Level of poverty, it is 5.2%. It's a gift of the God. Every natural resource, whether it's oil, gas, wind, sun, gold, silver, copper, all that are natural resources. And countries should not be blamed for having them and should not be blamed for bringing these resources to the market because the market needs them. The people need them.
Now, I raised some of these issues with Rebecca Newsom from Greenpeace when I spoke to her earlier, and I started by asking her whether, given Azerbaijan's human rights record, it was a fit country to host the UN climate conference.
The human rights abuses of Azerbaijan cannot be ignored, and certainly that does raise questions also around the civil society space that exists within this UN conference and whether there truly is, freedom of speech for campaigners and civil society groups to come out here and do their job and be safe. I think let's hope that the spotlight of this COP on Azerbaijan will help to put a bit more pressure on them. But, we would also sort of say the UN is committed to human rights for all. And through deciding to be the host of this conference, Azerbaijan really needs to recognize that and abide by that. Make sure that this conference is actually one that is safe for all observers and all participants.
Azerbaijan is also a very big oil and gas producer, as is the United Arab Emirates that hosted COP last year. And in fact, yesterday, the FT reported that Azerbaijan and the UAE have now forged a deal which will mean even more oil and gas production on the part of Azerbaijan. Does picking these big fossil fuel producing countries to host these COPs undermine the conference's credibility?
Certainly, it's incredibly challenging that the last few conferences have gone from one to the other fossil fuel producing country. And it is starting to get quite absurd that this has been the run of it. However, Azerbaijan as a host has committed to delivering a target to reduce its emissions in line with 1.5 degrees. that is an opportunity to put more spotlight on a country that might not normally be scrutinized so much when it comes to climate change. So in that sense, there is an opportunity, particularly when the host of any UN climate conference also is concerned about its reputation. So really, I think there is an opportunity to make some progress here. And I think actually when we look at the last two conferences that were also hosted in countries that are major fossil fuel producers, we did manage to make steps forward in terms of the global agreements. I'm not saying that that was good enough, far from it, but we have had increasingly strong language around commitments to phasing out of fossil fuels, transitioning away from fossil fuels. That language needs to be strengthened, and those commitments need to be really turned into action plans. But that is what we're here to do, and I think the fact that it's hosted in this country also allows us to kind of put some extra pressure on some of the countries in this region.
Yeah, you talked about their carbon emissions, but of course those are their domestic emissions. They're still producing oil and gas that they're selling on the market to other countries who are still, using it. The use of it still emits carbon. And it just, I suppose, to outside observers, it sometimes looks like, especially last year and perhaps this year as well, that the conference also becomes a kind of lobbying shop for people who work in the carbon fuel industries.
The number of fossil fuel lobbyists that attend these conferences is completely absurd and unacceptable. And in fact, I think, fossil fuel lobbyists need to be completely banned from these conferences because it completely, risks distorting the process. However, civil society is here also out in force. And as I said before, momentum is growing because we have countries around the world and populations around the world living and experiencing the impacts of climate change right here, right now. It's increasingly hard to deny that urgent action needs to be taken. It's increasingly hard to deny that we need to focus in on the fossil fuel industry. That is the momentum around that conversation and the conversation around phasing out of fossil fuels and actually making some commitments in this space is growing. So I think, the show goes on.
We've got an update on a story which we led yesterday's shows with. That's because in response to claims he failed to act on reports of abuse in the church, the Archbishop of Canterbury has resigned. Justin Welby released the following statement this afternoon. Having sought the gracious permission of His Majesty the King, I've decided to resign as Archbishop of Canterbury. The Mackin Review has exposed the long-maintained conspiracy of silence about the heinous abuses of John Smythe. When I was informed in 2013 and told that police had been notified, I believed wrongly that an appropriate resolution would follow. It's very clear that I must take personal and institutional responsibility for the long and re-traumatizing period between 2013 and 2023. It is my duty to honour my constitutional and church responsibilities, so exact timings will be decided once a review of necessary obligations has been completed, including those in England and in the Anglican Communion. I hope this decision makes clear how seriously the Church of England understands the need for change and our profound commitment to creating a safer church. As I step down, I do so in sorrow with all victims and survivors of abuse. Now, the abuse carried out by John Smythe was truly horrific. Across 5 decades, he's said to have subjected as many as 130 boys and young men in the UK and Africa to traumatic, physical, sexual, psychological, and spiritual attacks. In the 1970s and 80s, those attacks took place in the UK, where Smythe abused private schoolboys who attended evangelical Christian holiday camps. In later decades, the abuse was carried out against boys in Zimbabwe and South Africa. This morning, and before Welby's resignation, one of Smythe's victims, Andrew Morse, described his abuse to Radio 4.
At around the age of 16, 17, he started introducing to me the notion that I was sinning and that I needed to mark those sins in a form of repentance that really would mean something to the Lord. And his suggestion to that was beatings. He drew on various Old Testament verses to support his argument. And those beatings started for us around the age of 17. On my 21st birthday, John Smythe told me that I was still sinning and that required what he called a special beating. That was beatings of hundreds of lashes of a cane. And at that point, I realized that I couldn't take things any longer. And I firstly wrote a couple of anonymous letters to Christian leaders and to John Smythe. But when those had no effect, I decided that I would take my own life.
That was completely shocking testimony. And among some of the facts that we reported yesterday were that Smythe had beaten 2 boys 8,000 times each, and he'd beaten 8 boys 14,000 times, with 14,000 lashes rather, between them. And what's most shameful is that the church responded to reports like those from Andrew Morse, not by holding Smythe to account, but by encouraging him to move to Africa, where he continued his abuse, just against a different group of boys. For his part, Justin Welby denies knowing of Smythe's abuse before 2013, but he was presented with a report into Smythe when he took on the role of Archbishop of Canterbury and has been criticised for not having gone directly to the police. Mike, this is a truly horrible story. I think one of the worst abusers in the Church of England's history. Was Welby's resignation inevitable?
Absolutely. I think in 2014, what we spoke about how the church needs to do a much better job when it comes to dealing with allegations of this nature. And I think Welby has shown that, unfortunately, he did not do what he said. And I don't think the church has dealt with this well. And as someone who is a man of faith, my faith is actually what drives me to the left of politics, really, that focus on compassion, on safe spaces, on love. I think the Church of England have failed these victims, have failed the survivors of this sexual abuse. And I think ultimately some of the Church of England will hope that what we can resigning is the end of the story and they can kind of move on. But I think they need to do better. There needs to be kind of structures in place, proven structures in place that can prevent this abuse from happening again. There needs to be support provided, kind of trauma-based support provided for survivors. I mean, when you read the report, I think some survivors hadn't said anything before for 40 years. For 40 years living with that would do something to people. There needs to be support for these people. And ultimately, as a church, the church is one of the fundamental missions of Christ was to show love and compassion and empathy. And I think the church, in terms of this particular issue, are failing in quite a seismic way. So I think, Welby's resignation for me is a start of hopefully what should be some kind of reconciliation and hopefully change is required that are going to help support these victims and help prevent this nature and this kind of horrible abuse from happening again. Because let's be absolutely clear, this is a type of abuse that changes lives and people have to live with this for years and years. It's simply not good enough, and the church needs to do better, especially if they are to kind of profess the kind of biblical values of love and compassion and creating safe spaces and caring for them as vulnerable people in society.
If you're a person who's a member of a church or a religious group, that institution has a huge amount of power over you, and people within it or operating amongst it, as Smythe was doing, also have a huge amount of power over you. And in that testimony, we heard about how it was this young man's concern for sinning too much that led him to be beaten by someone who is absolutely the sinner in this story. I wanted to ask you, Mike, it took Welby quite a while to resign. When we did our piece yesterday, he was adamant that he wasn't going to. And I noticed in COP today, Starmer was asked about Welby and whether he supported him. And although he didn't say no, he clearly stepped back from any kind of support for the Archbishop. Do you think that might have had an important impact here?
I think possibly. I think I've seen a lot of kind of weird reporting. Some people saying he was Rory Stewart put out a tweet saying he's a lovely guy kind of vibe. And look, he might well have been a lovely guy, but I think ultimately he needed to go. He's overseen kind of the real mismanagement of these allegations, horrible allegations, and horrible kind of stuff that we've heard over the past couple of days and past couple of months, really. So, yeah, perhaps Keir Starmer kind of withdrawing a bit and stepping back might have put some pressure. But I do think his position was so untenable. I think the pressure was ramping up, and it was ramping up in such a profound way that I think him staying on ultimately would have undermined the kind of moral authority of the Church of England. It would have made things really difficult for them to kind of hold positions on many other things. So his position was untenable in my view, and I think some of the kind of takes I've seen in the aftermath of like Good Chap, I don't quite know if that's the tone we need to strike. The tone we need to strike is how do we move forward from this point on?
Yeah, it's irrelevant how nice he might have been. He is clearly just very bad at his job as the head representative of the Church of England. He didn't do what he was supposed to do. His sort of dinner party repartee has literally nothing to do with it. Donald Trump campaigned in this election as a candidate opposed to neocons and warhawks. Here's how he responded to Tucker Carlson when asked about Liz Cheney campaigning with Kamala Harris.
Is it weird for you to see Liz Cheney, that'd be Dick Cheney's repulsive little daughter, running against you with Kamala Harris?
Well, I think it hurts Kamala a lot, actually. Look, she's a deranged person. But the reason she couldn't stand me is that she always wanted to go to war with people. I don't want to go to war. She wanted to stay in Syria. I took them out. She wanted to stay in Iraq. I took them out. I mean, if it were up to her, we'd be in 50 different countries. She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. When the guns are trained on her face. They're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy. But she's a stupid person. And I'd have meetings with a lot of people, and she always wanted to go to war with people.
Now, that comment received headlines, unsurprisingly, for the gratuitously violent imagery Trump used to criticize a female rival. But if you try and separate Trump's pretty vile way of talking, there is a valid critique of the Cheneys lying beneath it. Dick Cheney, as George W. Bush's vice president, was the leading driver of the war on terror and the disastrous interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq. His and his daughter's support of the Democrats shouldn't have been welcomed by Team Harris, not by any one of them, and certainly not by Harris. But after winning, Trump's first hires have shown he is far from the anti-interventionist he claimed to be in the run-up to the presidential election. His biggest appointment so far is reported to be Florida Senator Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State. That's the equivalent to our Foreign Secretary. Rubio is considered a foreign policy hawk in Washington with tough stances on both China and Iran. And he was also instrumental in encouraging Trump to place crippling sanctions on Venezuela in 2019. Now, that was a bid to unseat President Nicolas Maduro, about whom Rubio said this to the New York Times. He's picked a battle he can't win. It's just a matter of time. The only thing we don't know is how long it will take and whether it will be peaceful or bloody. Now, that's a statement that implies a chilling disregard about the human costs any civil unrest could unleash. And the sanctions proposed by Rubio were themselves deeply damaging to the Venezuelan people. Maduro, of course, remains in power. More recently, Rubio has also been a strident opponent of a ceasefire in Gaza, telling this to a protester last year.
Senator Rubio, will you call for a ceasefire
No, I will not.
in Gaza?
On the contrary.
Rubio,
are you filming it?
Wait,
so I want you guys to get this. I want them to destroy every element of Hamas they can get their hands on. These people are vicious animals who did horrifying crimes. And I hope you guys post that.
And what about the civilians that are being killed every day?
Hamas should stop hiding behind civilians, putting civilians in the way. Hamas knew that this was going to lead to this. So Hamas should stop building their military installations underneath hospitals.
So you don't care that 15,000 have died? You don't care about the babies that are being killed every day?
I think it's horrifying. I think it's terrible, and I think Hamas is 100% to blame. That's what I think. Make sure you post that, please.
Trump's pick for his national security advisor is equally hawkish. For that job, Trump is reported to have picked Mike Waltz, who is a leading China critic in Congress. And Waltz is also a fan of the Middle East wars that Trump claims to be against, saying this about Afghanistan in 2017.
Are we 15 years in? Yes. Are we in for a lot more fighting? And do we need a long-term strategy to undermine the ideology of Islamic extremism, just like we did fascism and just like we did communism? Yes, we do. And, Gordon, I think we're in for a long haul, and I think our nation's leadership needs to begin telling the American people, I'm sorry, we don't have a choice. We are 15 years into what is going to be a multi-generational war because we're talking about defeating an idea. It's easy to bomb a tank, very difficult to defeat an idea, and that's exactly what we have to do.
Did you hear that guy shouting, "It's impossible" at the end? Well, Trump might have been better off giving the national security job to him. But far from draining the swamp, Trump appears to be taking a more conventional approach to staffing his foreign policy team, and that includes his hire as ambassador to the United Nations. For that job, Trump has picked Elise Stefanik. Stefanik came to national prominence in December last year when her grilling of 3 university presidents over supposed anti-Semitism led to 2 of them to resign. And in May last year, Stefanik gave a speech to Israel's Knesset, that's Israel's parliament, where she said this.
What we are witnessing today is a story of the forces of good versus evil, the forces of civilization against the forces of barbarism, of humanity versus depravity. I want to share something that I heard the writer Douglas Murray say a couple weeks ago, which I've witnessed for myself here these past few days. Israel chooses life. Murray is right, but let me go further. In choosing life, Israel fulfills Isaiah's prophecy to be a light unto nations, fighting for its survival and future in one very tough neighborhood. As long as I serve the American people, I will defend George Washington's vision of religious pluralism and freedom. Today, this means crushing anti-Semitism at home and supplying the state of Israel with what it needs, when it needs it, without conditions to achieve total victory in the face of evil. For all of you, total victory needs no explanation, but total victory is something too many others throughout the free world fail to understand. Total victory starts, but only starts, with wiping those responsible for October 7th off the face of the earth. There can be no retrievable dignity for Hamas and its backers. When the enemy is inside the gates of the United Nations, America must be the one to call it by its name and destroy it. President Trump understood this, and Bezrat Hashem, we will return to that strategy soon.
Now, that last statement about the United Nations is particularly scary given Stefanik's new role. Mike, Trump tried to present himself as a candidate against forever wars. Have the American people been hoodwinked?
Absolutely. I think it shows what Trump is. Trump is a liar. Trump is incessantly lying. So he ran this isolationist campaign, which is about we're going to end wars. But I think, the appointments he's made today, kind of foreign policy picks in Rubio, in Bolton, and Stefanik, these are all people who are from the hawkish, kind of classic conservative side of the Republican Party, who essentially don't want to de-escalate things, but rather want to escalate things. And I think my main concern would be when it comes to obviously what's going on in Gaza. These 3 people are people who would want to give Israel unrelenting support. Now, of course, US's stance on this issue under Harris was poor. Under Biden, rather, was poor. And I don't think it would have improved that much under Harris. But I do think these people are even worse than what we had before in terms of their stance, in terms of their rhetoric on this. And we know that Trump in the past, during his last presidency, was equally quite poor on the issue of kind of Palestinian rights and Palestine more broadly. He stopped funding for UNRWA, for example, which we know that Palestinian refugees rely on quite heavily. So I think just having these kind of people around him is going to lead to a far more regressive stance on kind of Palestinian rights. And again, I'm not for one second going to sit here and praise Biden's stance on the issue or Harris' stance on the issue. I thought both had quite weak, poor, and terrible stances on this issue that has led to the suffering of Palestinians in many ways, right? So I'm not going to stand here and defend their record, but I do think that what we're going to see now, unfortunately, is the emboldening of Israel, because these 3 people that are going to be kind of in the mix for the foreign policy approach that Trump's going to approach are genuinely people who are just unrelentingly pro-Israel. And I think one thing I'd say about Trump and his presidency is this is going to be the first of many lies that's going to come out, right? So I think one of the things Democrats found difficult is how the campaign and how the race went, because the Republicans don't play by the same rules the Democrats play by, right? The Democrats try to play this kind of like standard campaign where they speak about policies, they campaign, they get some big stars out to campaign for them, a very classic kind of campaign. Trump's campaigns, for as long as we've known them, have been based on kind of leaning into anger, have been based on essentially just lying unrelentingly. And then when he gets into office, kind of maybe pivoting in some ways or showing another side of his face. And I think, we've just seen the start of that. We're going to see more lies and more decisions that he said he wouldn't have taken. He's going to actually take them. And a lot of these are going to be very regressive decisions. So I think many people in the US public have been conned and are going to continue to be conned by this man who's just unfit for any public office. And unfortunately for the US, they have him there for the next 4 years. It's a real shame.
It is a real shame. I mean, I suppose one thing we might take some solace in is that in his last term, Trump was just not very good at getting on with his appointments, had a terrible relationship with the Chief of Staff, terrible relationship with the Secretary of State, and it kind of disrupted his ability to do perhaps as much as he might have liked to. I also wanted to point out there's another appointment, just because it's COP week, that we should mention, which is Lee Zeldin in the Environmental Protection Agency. He's someone who has said in the past that he has absolutely no support for the Paris climate agreements. But I wanted to ask you something just inspired by a comment I just saw, which is that it was someone saying that he knew someone or she knew someone who had voted for Trump in order to bring about the end of the American empire. What do you make of this kind of, what's your view of this kind of accelerationist argument about, actually in the long run, Trump might be a force for geopolitical good in that the US sort of shrinks or becomes isolated by its allies?
I'm not convinced by it. I have to say, the number one predictor for voting for Trump, right, was having an anti-immigrant stance. Let's be absolutely clear. I think what most people wanted, and to say the kind of uncomfortable bit out loud, I think many of Trump's voters were motivated by kind of this racial anxiety they have, this racism that they feel quite latent. Well, not even latent, but these people ultimately were driven by racism, right? And I think it's like so many people have tried to kind of provide so many different solutions as to why they might vote for Trump. It's this, it's that. I don't think any of these solutions or kind of answers, I think not everyone who voted for Trump voted because of the reasons I've suggested, but I think many people did vote because of it. And I think that's the uncomfortable truth that we need to kind of face up. So yeah, the kind of foreign policy approach, like I've seen some people suggest that, they voted for Trump because his stance on the kind of war in Gaza was better. It wasn't. It never was. And I was in Novara maybe like a couple of weeks ago, and I spoke about it, Harris, and how it's important she wins, not because I think she's amazing, not because I think she's the best thing to slice bread, she's going to make things better. But people keep on saying, how can things get worse? How can things get worse? And I do think we are going to see things get worse under Trump. I genuinely do believe this. So, yeah, like I don't really buy some of these kind of arguments that are being made about why people might vote for Trump and stuff. I do think a lot of people are motivated by this kind of anti-immigrant, this anger, and that might have fed into other things like economic anxiety, etc. I get it, but I don't think that's just a jumping off point. Even other things might have fed into the vote for Trump. Is kind of my view.
Hundreds of Palestinians are fleeing northern Gaza as Israel continues to ethnically cleanse the region. 130 families sheltering in an evacuation center and a school in Beit Hanun were reportedly issued evacuation orders by the Israeli military, forcing them to head south. According to Al Jazeera, a number of men were detained and taken away, and as the women, children, and elderly fled, they reported being targeted by Israeli quadricopter drones. Beit Hanun on Gaza's northeastern border is just one of the towns in northern Gaza that has suffered severe shortages of food and supplies for a month, ever since Israel began its sustained attack on the nearby Jabalia refugee camp. According to aid groups, that means that Israel has missed a US-imposed deadline to increase aid entering Gaza, and that deadline expired today. A group of 8 international aid organizations say that Israel has only partially complied with 4 of the US demands around aid. And Israel has not complied at all against the remaining 15 of the US's 19 demands. Voice of America reports this. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said 85% of its attempts to coordinate aid convoys and humanitarian visits to northern Gaza were denied or impeded last month. The office made 98 requests to Israeli authorities for authorization to go through the checkpoint along Wadi Gaza, but only 15 made it, UN spokesman Stefan Dujarric said Monday. The aid situation is now almost the worst it's been since the war began, if you can believe it. The amount entering Gaza has now fallen to its lowest level in 11 months. That means since January, a clear snub to Israel's greatest friend and funder, the US. And that lack of supplies has worsened the humanitarian situation in the north, with the UN's Famine Review Committee saying that famine is probably imminent in the area. But instead of working to resolve the issue, Israel is on a PR blitz. This was posted by COGAT, Israel's department responsibility for overseeing the occupied territories. A new humanitarian aid crossing into Gaza, the Kisafim crossing, started operating today. That was literally today that this was posted. This is part of our effort and commitment to increase the volume and routes of aid to Gaza. The aid enters Gaza after security checks at the Kerem Shalom crossing. But yesterday, the IDF posted this, found on an international aid convoy in Gaza. So on the one hand, and it was a picture of bullets, obviously. So on the one hand, you've got COGAT saying, we've got a new crossing, we're trying on the deadline to get aid across. And on the other, you've got the IDF saying this little bag of bullets explains why we're not sending aid in. Assuming that even happened, I mean, these trucks are so thoroughly checked by Israel at the crossings. Apparently, they're only allowed to travel in 50% full for ease of checking. Meanwhile, it's pretty clear the Israeli government has given up on the current US administration. After all, they're a lame duck. And Donald Trump's incoming leadership is likely to result in even greater support for Israeli crimes, if you can imagine it. At least that's what some Israeli politicians are banking on. Posting on X, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich said this, 2025, the year of sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. Judea and Samaria are the terms that right-wing Israelis use for the West Bank. At a meeting in the Israeli parliament, Smotrich said this, I have directed the start of professional work to prepare the necessary infrastructure to apply Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. I have no doubt that President Trump, who showed courage and determination in his decisions during his first term, will support the state of Israel in this move. Bezalel Smotrich is, of course, himself a West Bank settler. Thanks to his political tweets, Gary Lineker has long been a thorn in the side of the more conservative elements in BBC management. And now, after 26 years hosting Match of the Day, they've pushed him out of the job. The BBC's media editor tweeted this, end of an era. I understand Gary Lineker was open to staying on at Match of the Day past the end of the season, but with his contract ending, the BBC didn't offer him another for the show. He'll go out on a high, presenting the World Cup 2026. Thanks to his criticisms of the Tory government and his vocal support of refugees, Gary Lineker has long been a hate figure for right-wingers in Britain. But he's an incredibly popular TV presenter and is currently the BBC's best-paid star. And according to the Daily Mail, to keep his job, he even offered to accept a pay cut. They report this. The footballer turned pundit, 63, was open to staying and is even believed to have volunteered to take a £350,000 a year pay cut from his £1.35 million salary to stay as host of the flagship football show Beyond next May. But his new boss, Alex Kajelski, with whom he is not close, declined so he can freshen the corporation's Saturday night football coverage while cutting the salary bill. Now, with or without his Match of the Day gig, Gary Lineker will still be a big figure in British media due to his goal hanger podcast empire, which includes The Rest is History and The Rest is Politics. And in an interesting move, The Rest is Football podcast, which he hosts, will become available on BBC Sounds. And freedom from the Beeb could make Lineker even more outspoken, not that he ever seemed to cave to pressure, as was apparent in this conversation earlier this year about Israel with Mehdi Hassan.
The minute you raise your voice against what they're now doing there, you get accused of being a supporter of Hamas or all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of heavy lobbying on people to be quiet. So I understand why most people refrain, but I'm getting on a bit now. I'm fairly secure, and I can't be silent about what's happening there. I think it's so utterly awful. And now they're talking about, it already looks like it's happening, going into Rafah, where they've sent everybody down there. So, I don't think you can be, it's not anti-Semitic to say that what Israel is doing is wrong.
Sorry, our producer, Gary McQuiggan, just told me that he's named after Gary Lineker. His mum is a fan. Mike, I imagine you watch Match of the Day more than I do. How much is Lineker going to be missed?
He'll be missed a lot. I think Gary Lineker is the face of Match of the Day. I think if you're around my age, kind of like late 20s, and you've watched, and you're a football fan, you support a Premier League team possibly, and you watch Match of the Day, he's the person you associate with Match of the Day. He's the person you associate with BBC's sports coverage more broadly, I think, when it comes to their football coverage, certainly. And he's fundamentally really good at his job. He's a fantastic presenter. He's witty, he's funny. He provides good analysis when he does. When he's not hosting, he can often jump in and provide some good analysis. And just a lovely chap. And I think ultimately what's happened is, and the BBC wouldn't admit it, but we do know there has been this tension because Gary Lineker has become very outspoken when it comes to really important issues. We know that a couple of years ago, obviously, I think it was a couple of years ago, there was the issue of his criticism of the Conservative Party and its stance on migrants, and he spoke out rightly, very vocally against their stance on migrants. And I think, again, on the issue of Israel-Palestine, Lineker's been on the right side of history. He spoke with Mehdi Hassam there about the kind of the plight of Palestinians and how it isn't anti-Semitic to criticize what Israel are doing, and it isn't, right? So I think he's saying things that make the BBC uncomfortable, and I think the BBC just don't want to deal with it anymore. So it's a real loss for the BBC, and I don't imagine the next host of the Match of the Day is going to be that popular, because I think Gary's so synonymous to the show. I think people would have wanted him to leave on his own terms, and rather than this kind of feeling that Gary Lineker's being pushed out. So look, they can find kind of a charismatic host, I'm sure, who provides good analysis. But I do think that the circumstances of Gary's departure are going to make it awkward for the BBC and for Match of the Day moving forward. And I do think that he's just really good at his job. But it feels really odd to sack someone, or not quite to sack someone, they haven't sacked him, but to kind of nudge him out of the door, given that there's nothing wrong in terms of how he's doing his job. He's not deteriorating. People aren't getting tired of Gary Lineker. And there's a lot of Gary Lineker. He's doing podcasts every single week. There is a lot of him. People still like him. So yeah, it's a really odd one, driven, I think the BBC, again, I'm saying it's driven by his things and what he says. But look, Gary can rest assured he's on the right side of history. He's spoken a lot about some issues that matter. Not many people in positions of power have spoken out about issues like, what's going on in Gaza, what's going on with migrants' rights in Britain. So Gary Lineker's been quite vocal on these issues, and he should be kind of happy that he's going to leave essentially an institution on the basis of being on the right side of history, right? That he can sleep well at night. And also, he is bloody minted. Let's be absolutely clear. He's bloody minted. So he'll be fine. But yeah, a big loss for the BBC.
Yeah, and as we always say here, independent media is far superior to mainstream media. Perhaps it will give him a chance to focus on his, podcast empire, where he can speak more freely about the topics that he wants to speak about without, still having a pretty big audience.
Absolutely. I think ultimately Gary's decided at this point of his career, he doesn't need money, right? Gary Lineker's, again, he's minted. I don't think he wants to feel this sense of being constrained about what he can and can't say on issues that matter. Because ultimately, I think you probably reach a point in life when you've done what Gary Lineker's done. You've hosted Match of the Day for 25 years, had an amazing footballing career as well. Look, why can't I say what I want to say? Why should I be muzzled? Why should I not speak out about Palestinians and their plight because I'm working for this organization who feel uncomfortable with it? Why should I? So look, he probably has more than what he would need as a human being. So I think, yeah, in many ways, if the BBC's loss, and maybe in many ways Gary Lineker's gain, he'll go from strength to strength, I'm sure, and do amazing things, and he'll still be talking about football for years to come. So it's their loss, it's his gain, and hopefully we get to see him fight a good fight still.
Among the backlashes to Rachel Reeves' first budget, it's been the reaction from farmers that has proved the most vociferous. Their beef, no pun intended, was a move by Reeves to reduce the tax breaks farmers enjoy when it comes to inheritance. Now, to my mind, that policy was entirely reasonable. Removing tax breaks is generally a good thing. But farmers are really very annoyed. And according to The Telegraph, some rebel farmers have threatened port and supermarket disruption. Presumably, food blockades aren't really something Labour would welcome in their first few months in office. But unfortunately for the government, a former Labour advisor has decided to add fuel to the proverbial fire.
I'm personally in favour of doing to farmers want to go on the streets, we can do to them what Margaret Thatcher did to the miners.
So just to be clear, John, you would, beat them up?
No, close them. I mean, this is an industry we could do without.
So, okay, all right, so this got weird. So you would do to farmers what Margaret Thatcher did to miners, which was, and she used very heavy-handed police tactics, followed by what? Putting them out of business.
If people are so upset that they want to go on the streets and spray slurry on them, then we don't need the small farmers.
Right. Okay, John, I'm not sure that's a particular... You were, just to clarify, you were a former Labour special advisor, possibly emphasis on the word former there.
Jesus. So Keir Starmer has disowned those comments, very unsurprisingly, given how pissed off the farmers are already, telling a GB News journalist that he totally disagrees with what John McTernan said in that clip. Mike, will Labour be begging McTernan to turn down any future interview invitations?
Absolutely. That was a car crash. I mean, whatever your stance on this is, and I don't think actually Labour's policy is bad at all on this. I mean, I'm happy to provide evidence that kind of maybe pushes back against this slightly. I haven't got a crystallized view or anything, but generally speaking, I kind of lean on the side of this is not an unreasonable policy, but it doesn't mean you kind of smugly go onto GB News and say, yeah, but essentially saying we almost want to punish these farmers. It's kind of the tone that Starmer wouldn't want is this idea of like we're punishing these people, we're punishing small businesses, and it just comes across as very, very malicious. And we spoke earlier, and I ultimately think a lot of the interventions by Blairites in our politics today, whenever they try and do the bidding of Starmer, they often go on. Tony Blair will be wheeled out at some point before Christmas to say something again, I'm sure. It'd be something about the culture wars or something like Starmer needs to do this or whatever. All these Blairites get wheeled out as opportunities, and they always say really daft things. They just genuinely say really daft things. And look, these are people who often frame themselves as savvy political operators, so smart, so bright, the best of the best. These are the adults. And we have the adults behaving like children on GB News, saying silly things that ultimately reflect quite poorly on the Labour Party and Keir Starmer. So I think Keir Starmer needs to talk to the adults and let them know that they actually need to behave like adults rather than children and stop saying silly things. Because to say we don't need farmers, I mean, whatever your position on the policy, again, is an obscene thing to say. And he said it was such smugness. So yeah, adults, please behave like adults. Stop being children. The Blairites aren't helping anyone.
That interview seemed like a bit of a deliberate headline grabber to me. But also, just on the topic of small farms, I mean, one of the reasons I think for getting rid of that tax break was to stop rich people from buying up farms as a way of passing down an inheritance or avoiding tax on their inheritance. But of course, a way of making it up to farmers would be to, for example, provide subsidies for productive smaller farms. And I don't know what you think about small farms. I don't have a lot of views, but just like doing a bit of research this afternoon, I mean, it seems to me there are very good arguments for biodiversity. For example, that small farms are good for biodiversity of animals and wild plants, but also for crops. Big corporate farms tend to just grow a small number of strains which are like highly successful, whereas food security requires that we maintain a wide diversity of crops that we grow. It's also the case that apparently on a well-run small farm, per hectare, it can be more productive than the large farms, although it is more labor intensive. So there do seem arguments to keep small farms going, so not just move over to a kind of corporate megalopoly producing our food for our supermarkets. What are your views on this?
Yeah, I think I'm with you on this. I think there is a value in small farms. I think when it comes to biodiversity, also when it comes to food security, I think you mentioned that some of the farming practices by smaller farms might be more conducive and might be slightly better than some of the kind of approaches by kind of more corporate farms. And I think ultimately some of these farms, obviously, these are kind of maybe more of an emotional argument. They do mean something to people, right? These farms might be part of a kind of family history, etc. So I don't think we should just totally just kind of get rid of them. I think there are some benefits, but again, I do think the kind of tax break was kind of getting rid of it rather was something that was a good decision by Labour. And again, as part of their budget, I think this is it feels. I'm really intrigued. I don't know what your thoughts on this, Stephen, but I'm really intrigued that this is one of the big things that's come out of the budget in terms of this is one of the things that the right have latched onto is like Labour don't care about ordinary people and Labour do. I found that really interesting. Like this is the one thing from the budget they've taken, and it's like that's Labour showing they don't care about kind of ordinary people. I think things like the 2-child benefit cap is still in place, by the way. So I think maybe there should be more noise from some of these people on the right about those kind of issues. So yeah, I don't think we should kind of just totally get rid of these small farms. Far from it. I think they do have some value, especially in a kind of like globalized world, which can be so unstable. And again, when it comes to food security, biodiversity, they have some value. They're really important. But yeah, I'm just intrigued by this idea that this has been latched onto by someone on the right. Like GB News have been covering this extensively, which is why they get John on to do his whole rant about farming, because this is seen as a really big issue on the right. I mean, Farage has been tweeting about it relentlessly. So I'm someone who hasn't got like a strong view. I mean, I could speak to someone tomorrow who's more of an expert and have like a slightly different view to the one I have today. I haven't got a crystallized view on this, but as someone who hasn't got a crystallized view, I'm genuinely intrigued by the right's incessant kind of focus on it in the kind of weeks or the kind of the days following the budget.
Yeah, I don't think I've got a consistent view either. I mean, what I do think is that I've no problem with small productive farms using good techniques, sustaining biodiversity and food security. What I do have a problem with is farms for rich people, which are just like sort of countryside playgrounds, wasting land that could be put to better and more productive use. So if there are fewer of those, I don't really mind. But I suppose I would like to see small local farms, which are productive, continue to go. I mean, could continue to farm rather than disappear.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, if they're productive, again, good practices as well is really important. Food security, biodiversity, all of those things are the fundamental things when it comes to kind of small farms. But yeah, you don't want these kind of essentially some kind of rich person's playground. Just we don't need more of those. Essentially, we essentially, especially when we're going through kind of a housing crisis where there are issues of space and what we can do better with space. Yeah, kind of having a rich guy's playground it there just for him to mess around with is not what we need. We need to use space better in Britain.
Yeah, absolutely. We have enough ponies. Thank you, Mike.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining me tonight. And thanks everyone for watching tonight. Come back tomorrow for another show from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.